Hey everyone, Greg here and welcome back to the shop. And if you haven't noticed, today we're going from land to sea because I got this Kawasaki jet ski behind me, and unfortunately winter is here, and that means I had to pull this thing out of the water and it's time to winterize it. So since I have to actually do the job anyway, I figured why not shoot a video and show all of you guys how to winterize a personal watercraft if you have one or if you plan on getting one for yourself in the future. Now I do want to note that every single jet ski winterization process will be different depending on the year, make, and model, and of course the manufacturer. So I urge all of you, if you own a personal watercraft or if you plan on buying one in the future, to make sure that you check with the manufacturer to ensure you're following the right procedures. But all in all, a lot of these steps will also transfer to any year, make, or model jet ski. Now before we get started, you are going to need some supplies, and all of these supplies will be pretty much standard no matter what jet ski you are going to winterize. Let's get started with the fuel system. Now you're going to need a fuel stabilizer to store your ski over the winter months. This is going to keep all that fuel fresh for the next time you go ride it in the spring. Next, fogging oil is going to be incredibly important. All the cylinders have to stay very well lubricated while it's sitting for all those months covered in the winter. After that, I always recommend picking up a can of fluid film. This stuff really thrives in marine environments and it's designed to disperse water and reduce corrosion, and it's a great lubricant for all the moving parts on your watercraft. And finally, a good coat of wax and a clean rag is always recommended to shine it up and keep the coat protected while it's stored over winter. All right, now that we have all the supplies and everything we need, let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to start with the fuel system. All right guys, so like I just mentioned, we're going to start the winterization process on this jet ski with the fuel system. Now there's two recommended ways to treat the fuel system when winterizing your jet ski. It's either to siphon all of the fuel out and then run the engine completely dry so there's no fuel whatsoever in the system, or the easier method, and what I like to do, is treat the fuel system with fuel stabilizer, run it through the engine, and make sure to top the tank off completely so moisture can't build up inside the fuel tank. We're going to take care of that now. Now, depending on your jet ski and the size of your fuel tank will be dependent on how much fuel stabilizer you add to the tank. For this ski, it's just over 16 gallons, so that means we're going to add 7 ounces of fuel stabilizer to our fuel system. Now, this Stay-Bil canister has a gauge on this side of the canister so we can measure out each and every one. It's pretty simple. We can simply just take the cap off, fill up the one side until we have 1 ounce, and then simply pour that right into the fuel tank. And we're simply going to do that 7 times to treat our fuel. Now I like to add the fuel stabilizer first and then get some fresh fuel to top off the tank to ensure that the stabilizer mixes in with all the fuel properly. Then after that, we're going to go ahead and run the engine to make sure that that stabilized fuel circulates through the fuel rails and all the parts of the fuel system. All right, with our fuel tank topped off and our stabilizer added, now we're going to run the ski, but we're going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone on this one. We're going to circulate that stabilized fuel into the fuel rails on the engine, and while running the ski, any other water that's left in the cooling system, we can flush out from the last time this was flushed out. This is a really important step because you want to make sure that there is no water left in the cooling system that can freeze and expand and possibly damage parts of the engine over the winter. All right guys, now it's time to tackle the cooling system on our personal watercraft. Now there are 2 main types of cooling systems that are used on watercrafts, and that's either a closed loop system or an open loop system. Now a closed loop system is essentially its very own cooling system just for the engine in the watercraft. The jet pump itself will use the actual water that you're riding on to cool it. Now for those types of jet skis, I recommend following the instructions for the manufacturer, and usually you don't really have to do too much because they actually run an antifreeze through those systems. Now this jet ski is a little bit older and uses the more simpler open loop cooling system, meaning that it uses the water that you're riding on to cool both the engine and the jet pump. And because of that, and this ski is primarily used in salt water, we want to make sure that we get every single bit of water out of the cooling system before we store it for winter. Now it should already be rinsed from the last time, and you should always be rinsing the cooling system every time you finish riding your ski, but of course we want to make sure there's no water in the system. So to take care of that, we're going to pull a hose off on the back side of the engine that's actually going to drain every bit of water out of the exhaust system into the hull. Once it's fully drained, we'll reconnect the hose, and then we'll also take the drain plugs out of the hull and get all the water out of the hull of the ski. Now to loosen this clamp, you can either use a 1/4-inch ratchet and a socket, or just a Phillips head screwdriver on the clamp. All right, hose is off. And I'll simply just, if there is any water left within this system, we will simply let the hose just drain right into the hull, and then we will loosen up the drain plugs in the back. All right, guys, not much water actually came out of that hose, which means that we did a really good job evacuating all the water from the cooling system. So now I'm simply just gonna take my hose clamp, put it back onto the hose, and then reconnect this and ensure that it's tight, because God forbid if it isn't, when you go to ride your ski next season, this hull will immediately start filling with water, so make sure it's tight. Now, even though we got little to no water out of our cooling system hose, which is a good thing, we still want to make sure that we get all of the water out of the actual hull. So we're going to come back here, open up our drain plugs to the hull on the stern of the ski, and we're going to pop these guys out on both sides. And then after that, I'm simply going to go up to the front of the trailer, tilt this thing back, and make sure that we expel all of the water out of the hull. That way you don't have to worry about any water inside freezing and expanding and possibly damaging things over the winter. Once again, we did a really great job. No water in this hull whatsoever. We're going to close up both the drain plugs here at the stern and move on with the winterization process. All right, so now at this point, we have the fuel system taken care of. We just finished up the cooling system in our winterization process. Now it's time to take care of the motor. And by that, I mean fogging the cylinders. Now, once again, every jet ski will be a little bit different within this procedure, whether it's carbureted, fuel injection, or a specific model. However, the basic principles are the same. What we're gonna do is pull each and every spark plug wire out, and then remove the plugs. And I'm going to do this by keeping all these wires somewhat organized so I know exactly where they go and to not mix up the firing order. Once you get your wires out, simple ratchet with a spark plug socket of the right size of your spark plugs, and we're going to go ahead and pull the plugs out of each cylinder. Now, once we get these plugs out, what we're going to do is take our fogging oil and spray a liberal amount in each cylinder. And after we've sprayed each and every cylinder, we're then going to crank the motor over with the spark plugs out and the fuel system disabled. So we make sure that we coat the cylinders with oil so we avoid any kind of corrosion once again over the winter months. Now, since we're doing this anyway and we have to pull the plugs to fog the cylinder, now's a really great time just to inspect your spark plugs. Now, everybody is a little bit different depending on the type of ski that you have, the type of riding that you do, how often you ride your skis, but on average, I'd like to say I'd recommend replacing plugs at least once every season or once every 2 seasons to make sure they're in good shape. Now, these I put in actually at the beginning of the season, and looking at them right now, they look pretty great. You know, they are a little dirty, but not nearly as bad as what I would think after doing some hard riding throughout the season. All right, guys, all the plugs are out on the motor. Now it's time to take our fogging oil. Like I said, give a good liberal amount in each and every cylinder so we can make sure to coat them evenly and have zero corrosion over the winter. Now that we have every cylinder with some fogging oil in it, we're going to come back over, turn on the ski, and again, make sure fuel and or ignition system is disabled, and crank her over a couple times. Do it one more time. And now we have perfectly coated and oiled cylinders for the winter. Now, all we have to do is put all of our spark plugs back in to all of our cylinders, make sure to torque them down. What I also recommend, seeing as that you have the plugs out, and to reduce any kind of corrosions or issues, put a little bit of anti-seize on the threads of each one of the spark plugs. One too many times have I seen plugs seize in a head on a watercraft over the winter, and then it's just disastrous, and before you know it, you're pulling the motor out and pulling the head off the engine to get it repaired. So, save yourself a headache, put a little anti-seize on it. All right, guys, we have all of the cylinders fogged on our jet ski, so that is now one thing that we can check off in our winterization process. Now, if you do have a personal watercraft, your manufacturer may recommend changing the oil when you winterize your jet ski. Now, I personally like to change it in the spring when I'm ready to use it, because if you change it now, you have fresh oil in your ski that's simply just going to sit, and even though the engine's not being run, the oil is still going to deteriorate over time. So I recommend changing in the spring, but if you want to follow your manufacturer's recommendations, systems to a T, you can certainly do so as well. But since that's all done and we're not changing the oil on this jet ski engine, now we get to lubrication. Now, if you've noticed, the engine on this ski does have an oily residue all over the top of the motor, and that's done for a specific reason. That is the fluid film that I had talked about earlier. Like I said, this is a great tool that disperses water and reduces any kind of corrosion and is great for marine environments. So normally I always spray a coating over the engine for the season just to keep everything protected from the salt water. What I also like to do is lube other areas of the jet ski so they don't seize over the winter. So right now what I'm going to do is lube up the throttle cable on the handlebars, a little bit of fluid film, as well as the steering cable on the back of the pump and the reverse cable as well, to make sure that everything stays lubricated and nothing is seized on me in the spring. With everything lubricated, now we're going to move on to our battery and electrical system. Now, the last thing you want to do is leave a perfectly charged battery in your jet ski to sit outside all winter long, because by the time you go to use it in the spring, it's going to be stone cold dead. So what we're going to do is disconnect ours, bring it out of the ski, and I always recommend purchasing a good trickle charger to let this thing sit on a charger all winter long so it keeps fresh for the spring. First, you want to remove your hold downs. Every single jet ski will have some type of battery hold down, just because of the amount of bounce around these things do out on the water. We'll move the boots away from the terminals. The one thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with these smaller batteries is there's a square lock actually inside the terminal that the screw threads into to hold the battery cable on. Do what you can to make sure that you don't lose those, because they're a pain in the neck to find another set. What I like to do to make sure that I don't is unthread the terminal bolt, and then I can remove the terminal. But before I even think about taking the battery out, I'm going to thread this bolt back in to the square stop to make sure that I don't lose it when I tilt the battery out of the hole. And then I'm just going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Once again, get my cable out of the way, thread the bolt back in, and now lift this up and out of the hole. All right, guys. Well, all the hard stuff is done. Fuel system taken care of, engine, electrical system and battery, everything lubricated. All we have to do now is give her a nice, good coat of wax, which I always recommend every time you winterize your ski. And that's it. We can tuck her away for next spring. Thanks for watching this video, and for more DIYs, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and I'll see you guys next time.